Hello and welcome to Enquire to Choir. My name is Eva and I'm here to help you, fellow choir people. In this video, we're going to talk about a really tricky subject, in my opinion, that is not easy to handle: how to solve choir conflict. As you know, as a choir director, a group of people, like a choir is, tends to sometimes, hopefully just sometimes and not very often, come into a situation where suddenly there is a conflict. In this video, I will cover the situation when the choir is in the conflict, not you as the choir director. So a choir gets into a conflict and you're just standing there looking at them, trying to resolve the situation as the leader of the group. I will not be covering the situation when you as the choir director are in conflict with your choir, which is a worse situation. I thought about putting it in this video, but I went through that a couple of days ago and everything is okay. But to be honest, I don't want to go through that again, not even in theory. So that's a video that's coming on the channel in a few weeks. This situation, when the choir as a group of people is in conflict about something and you're the manager of that group, the director of that group, I think this is a really difficult situation, actually. To be able to resolve that situation is something that requires a lot of management skills and human resources skills. So if you're feeling like you don't know how to resolve that and just react very, stunned or scared, or you feel like you don't have the skills and you feel incapable, just know that this is not so simple. The situation is not a simple situation. And the whole reason why I'm talking about this now, after more than 5.5 years here on the channel, is because now I feel like I have something to say, because I have been through several conflicts. I think I can manage them better. Plus, after the 2 years of the whole world thing that was happening, the one that stopped all of the choir shenanigans around the world, now it's the first time that we're back to normal when it comes to choirs, and suddenly I realized that I forgot about certain conflicts that can happen, because now all the people are relaxed and they forgot about the being grateful that we can have a choir now. So the conflicts are something that occur, and I wanted to tackle that subject. So let's start with the video, and I hope you find it helpful. There are two main problems that you as the choir director have when there is a conflict among choir members. The first one is you as a choir director represent the whole choir. So if everything is going accordingly to all of the preferred situations, you represent the interest of the choir, but at the same time, the interest of every choir singer. So when there is a conflict between choir singers, the question is, what do you do as a choir director? Because if you go along one side, one opinion of the conflict of a group of choir members that are in conflict, then you can turn out to be against someone else in the choir. That sounds really dramatic, but it's true. If you take a side, then the other side doesn't have your support in theory. So that can affect, especially when it comes to amateur choirs, that can affect the group really negatively. So it is a huge issue how you handle a conflict that is in the choir. The second problem is, as we discussed in the previous video, when it comes to choir myths, your main discussions when it comes to your choir will not be about music. It will be about these things. So when a conflict happens, it happens during the rehearsal, before or after the rehearsal, and that influences the rehearsal, or between two rehearsals, so the next rehearsal is influenced by the conflict, okay? You want to talk about music, you want to do music, you have so much stuff to do to make the choir sound better and to get through all of the things they have to get through in order to be ready for the performance. But it turns out that you had to take your time to resolve a conflict. And the first thing I will tell you is, yes, you have to take the time to resolve that conflict. It is very natural for the conflict to happen. That doesn't mean that the choir is not okay. It means they're normal people. You know how is it in life, in relationships, in families, there is always some kind of an argument. The root of many conflicts is not the fact that they are against each other, but the fact that the communication turns something around and the conflict happens. So just because a conflict happens doesn't mean that it is alarming, but it does mean that you have to take your time, because if you do not resolve that conflict in some kind of a way, it's like repressing emotions. When you repress emotions, they will come out eventually, and even Freud said they will definitely come out eventually, and when they come, they will be the worst monsters. So the point is, resolve conflict, don't suppress anything, let it breathe, because it's healthier to deal with it when it happens than covering it up and putting it under the rug and then dealing with the repercussions later. My main point is, yes, you will have to deal with it during rehearsals, and it is your job to deal with it. I know the choir probably has their choir management, which means that the conflict, the solving of the conflict, maybe is not always in your field, but you are the one who stands in front of the choir all of the time, and the choir singers think of you as someone who can influence this situation. Because if you're dealing with music all the time and you're instructing them about music, then if they're in a conflict, it is assumed that you will be the one who resolves that conflict. So it's completely natural that you're put in that position. Is it fair? Not necessarily. You just want to do music, but sometimes it is unavoidable. So the first advice would be just accept it, that you have to deal with it. The way how to deal with it is something that is, there is skill and a science that is called management, and there is something that is called HR management, and this is actually a part of that. There are better ways to do it and worse. It doesn't matter what the conflict actually is. For example, the last conflict one of my choirs had was about a word being written wrong on the music sheet. It was a discussion. It was a fight of 10 minutes. I remember just everything was going great and everybody was singing, and we were coming to the end of the rehearsal, and suddenly, and they're in conflict. And I'm like, how did that just happen? While I was looking at them arguing, they were polite, but they were not so polite, They were not bad words, but they were not being nice. They were being really pushy from every side. And I was standing and I was looking at them, and I realized that, okay, I have to let this happen. And it comes down to letting the choir have its conflict so that the energy of a conflict comes out and it goes, and then comes a moment when everything becomes a little bit more calm. And in my experience, that's the moment I should intervene. In my opinion, as choir directors, when we see that there is already a conflict, we should do something, but we should be proactive about it and not reactive. What that means is, if you find yourself in the middle of rehearsal and there is a conflict, if you react with, "Stop talking, stop fighting," that will bring the already high energy even further up. So I don't think that's very smart. Of course, it depends on the situation. Let the conflict happen, but of course, not indefinitely. There is a point in that conflict, in that arguing, when there is no point anymore of arguing. That happens when the energy is down because everybody said their opinion and they're either tired or they express themselves. So the whole energy of the group, of the fight, just calms down. That's the point when you can interfere. Before that, either it's 5 minutes or 15 minutes, but if the energy is really high, I don't think there is a good way to intervene until the whole conflict doesn't even have a point anymore. So if the energy is very high and everybody's arguing, but at a certain point everybody starts just repeating the same arguments and nothing is getting solved, that's the point of an argument where there is no more point of spending time on this. When to intervene as a choir director, I would say if they're suddenly silent and calmer and just it blew over, or if you feel that the argument is getting, heated without any reason and the arguments are just repeating themselves, that's the point of intervening. And you as the choir director can intervene in many ways, but while waiting for that point of intervention, you should do several management skills. And if you Google anything about management and resolving conflict, you'll find these things. You have to observe. I literally just stand there and I observe. I let them have it. I observe and I try to go through these 4 points. The first thing I want to do is clarify what is the source of conflict. This sounds really obvious, but often the source of conflict, some things are deflected. Sometimes we can argue about someone being late, but it turns out that we are actually arguing about something that the person did to us 5 years ago. So we as people are complicated. So this clarification of what the source of the conflict actually is very helpful. And you as a person who is not in the conflict can see that more precisely. The second thing is to listen actively and let everyone have their say. This sounds really counterintuitive because if you want the argument to dissolve, it would be more logical that you just stop everyone from talking. But again, if you do that, it will happen again. So if everybody who is in the conflict, and let's be honest, if you have a choir of 50 people, there will be 5 people to 10 people in a conflict. I don't think that 50 people would have their say. Most people would just go, okay, why do we have to do that? The third thing while observing the conflict is to determine the best ways to get to the common goal. This is very important when it comes to choir work. In order for the choir to be a functioning choir and to sound good, you need to have a choir that has a common goal. And the common goal is probably that everyone is at peace with the situation. You need a referee, and you are that referee, and you need to find a common goal for the choir, not for several singers, but for the choir and for yourself, for the choir work you need to do. And the final thing during observing the situation is to agree on the best solution. So it's not just about you getting your way as a choir director. You want your choir to be satisfied with the solution. That's where the intervention comes in. You want your choir to be happy. And in many cases, there are people in the choir who are louder and more important to please. We don't talk about that, but it is true that not every singer in the choir is as hard to please as some of the singers, okay? Let's be real. Many times I see choir directors going about this by making the more difficult choir singers happier, which is something that, makes them happier and makes the conflict go down. But at the same time, you have to take into account that there are other people in the choir. So the intervention that should come has to be fair to everyone. Just because someone is louder in a conflict doesn't mean that they're right. You know that. It's about getting to the fair solution, not the most convenient one. Do you have to be a stronger person as a choir director to achieve this? Yes, of course. Do you have to have the ability to communicate that? Yes, of course. But that's something that you will learn, and that's something that gets easier if you pick a good moment to intervene. The whole choir will be calmer if the solution you suggested was fair. And it's much easier to handle dissatisfied people in the choir if the solution was fair. If it was fair, then you can't argue with that anymore. I will mention that sometimes if the argument happens at the end of the rehearsal, sometimes I just leave it for it to happen and I don't resolve it. I just wait for the next rehearsal. From my experience, I will always get information about the conflict. Did it continue? Was it a really short one? Did everything get resolved on its own? Was everybody just having a bad day? And the argument was just, a vessel, how to get better. So sometimes the best solution is to leave it for the next rehearsal or leave it for the space between two rehearsals. But that doesn't mean that you have to avoid resolving that conflict. It just means that sometimes you have to sleep on it to get to a better place. If you have a choir management that actually does the job it's supposed to do, you can always say, listen, I can feel that the choir is not adjusted really well. There are some conflicts I want to resolve. Let's have a meeting. Or speak to the choir management and they will say what they know, what information they have, what the conflict is about, so you can resolve it together. You're not always an island when it comes to resolving conflict, but if it happens during the rehearsal, just play it smart, okay? After all, if your choir sees you can resolve their conflict, you will get their respect and you will get some power, so look at it that way. Okay. So that's it. I hope this answered the question. Again, another video coming about this in a few weeks. If you are here, I'm happy that you're here. If you want to stay, you can subscribe. You can watch all of the other videos here. There are several playlists. If you want me to talk to you, you can email me and you can find me on Facebook. Facebook became active again, as I hope you can see already. Just Enquire to Choir on Facebook and we can probably chat there. Thank you for being here and thank you for watching. Conduct well, conductors, and I'll see you next time. Bye!